Welcome to Lombardi's Legends podcast. It's Dane. I'm here with Wags. Wags, we've got this fancy new intro here, and it is good to be talking football once again. And Wags, final preseason game in the books. It's time for roster decisions. A lot of hard decisions for the Packers.
Yeah, for sure. We're 0-3, but no need to panic. Relax. As we like to say, it's just the preseason that's in the books, and now it's getting down to business. Dane, we're definitely going to get into some of these 53-man roster predictions. So thanks, folks, that are joining us here on Facebook or YouTube Live. We'll also have the recording on our podcast later on for those of you that aren't with us. But hey, join us in the chat, too, if you have any comments on how you think this team is shaping up here as we break camp and what your predictions are for this 53-man roster. Are we going to have any surprise cuts? We'll get into all of that here shortly. But Dane, I thought we could do a little bit of house cleaning at the top, a little state of the pod, if you will. So we've got the fancy new toys, like you said, and part of the reason that's coming to you is we have been fortunate enough to join a partnership with the Pigskin Podcast Network and Amaze Media Labs. So, Dane, do you want to just share a little bit of how we've connected with them and what that's going to mean for folks that are watching us here this season?
Yeah, I think the good news is a lot of it's not going to change. If you listen, you subscribe to us, that's not going to change. What we're really excited about is to be part of the Pigskin Podcast Network family. We are going to be the Green Bay Packer podcast representative. This network is going to have every single team in the NFL as part of the family. They approached us. They liked what we were up to, and I think a lot of it has to do with our listenership, so thank you very much. If you've been listening to us since the beginning, we sure appreciate you. This is going to give us a larger audience, and it's really exciting. We're going to be able to talk about the Green Bay Packers. Wags, in fact, we're contractually obligated now to talk about the Green Bay Packers, which is a dream of mine since I was a little kid. But I think day to day, you're not going to see a lot of change. If you subscribe to us, you're still going to be subscribed to us, but I think it's going to give us a chance to really broaden our base a little bit, get to know some of the other fans and podcasts around the National Football League. We might jump on some of their podcasts. They might be coming on some of ours to give us a preview of teams we're going to be facing. I think it's just going to make our content even that much better. So we're really excited to be part of the Pigskin Podcast Network.
Yeah, and of course, they hooked us up with a few bells and whistles here, so that doesn't hurt as well. So thanks, everyone. Obviously, those of you that have been with us for a long time now, we've been doing this for, this is our third season, so if you've been with us since the beginning, we so appreciate you. Hopefully, we've been able to get better and better with the content that we're bringing to you. And for those of you that have never been with us, jump on board. We'll be here all season. Schedule will look pretty consistent. Post game, we'll be doing a pod as well as every Thursday. So we like to at least get at least one practice and initial injury report before we do our weekly predictions and our weekly breakdown and preview. So we'll have two pods every week. Most likely be doing it live as well as recorded. So you'll be able to get your podcast recording if you're not able to join us live. But also we do like to do some Instagram live either at halftime or immediately following the game. So stay tuned for that. And then, of course, you can follow us on all of the social media outlets, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, wherever you find us, we're there. So appreciate you following along. And so, Dane, I think it's enough about us. Let's get into the Packers. So where do we start? Let's first maybe just break down what we saw yesterday against the Buffalo Bills and some of the takeaways that we had as we lead into this discussion on what these final roster cut downs are going to look like on Tuesday. So big takeaways, Dane. What did you take away the most from yesterday's game against the Bills?
Yeah, I took away this is a very talented roster. It was interesting to see the Buffalo Bills played a lot of their starters. Very different philosophy from what the Green Bay Packers had went into with this preseason. But I would say that overall, quite a bit of talent on the roster. The running back depth is remarkable this year. Wide receiver, they made it really, really tough there. Some of the guys on the back end of the roster that are battling for position. Still a question mark of what our starting five is going to be for week one on the offensive line. Defensive line, Jack Heflin made it really interesting there. I mean, across the board, Wags, broadly speaking, there was a lot of competition yesterday. We saw a lot of young guys getting a lot of snaps as well. And I'm going to be curious to see as we go into roster breakdown and roster cuts and everything from here on out, what that all means, because we saw a lot of these young guys getting a ton of snaps. Inside linebacker really stuck out to me. Oren Burks suited up. I don't think he played all that much. Ty Summers didn't suit up at all. Campbell didn't suit up at all. Chris Barnes didn't suit up at all. And McDuffie got a ton of run. So across the board, Wags, we were able to do, I think, what fans should be looking at, which is not wins and losses or entertainment value in the preseason. It's about talent evaluation. The Packers took that to heart. And it was pretty clear yesterday looking at some of the snap counts that there are some guys on the bubble that the Packers took a very, very long, hard look at.
Definitely. And a few guys that we did not get to see yesterday, which may have come as a little bit of surprise to some folks, was Devin Funchess as well as Kamal Martin. Both of those guys were put on the IR earlier last week and since have reached an injury settlement, at least with Devin Funchess. So it's an interesting development there. I know there were a lot of fans, especially, that were looking forward to seeing what Funchess could do on this roster potentially, but you and I have been saying all along that he was very much on the fringe, and we weren't going to necessarily predict that he was going to be on this roster just because he doesn't necessarily contribute anything on special teams. So I don't know how significant that injury that he had was, but to me, that points to that he was not going to make this final roster, because if they really wanted to keep him, they would have put him on the 53, then IR'd him so that he would be potentially eligible to return later in the season. The fact that that didn't happen means that the Packers were ready to move on from Devin Funchess, and by reaching an injury settlement, that means he'll be eligible to sign with anyone immediately, and the Packers are not eligible, are not on the hook to pay him the whole season. In fact, they just have to pay him for the number of weeks he was projected to be out with that injury. So that's part of the process, and that saves them a little bit of money then too. So it's an interesting development for sure. But I don't think either of us were terribly surprised, especially considering some of the play, some of his other wide receiver compatriots, especially what they were doing on special teams. So we'll get into that a little bit more. Kamal Martin, you went out on a limb prior to the game against the Jets and said Kamal Martin had the most to gain or lose as an X factor on the defensive side of the ball. You couldn't have been more right. Unfortunately for Kamal, he stood to lose the most because he did not play well against the Jets. And in fact, I think probably the nail in the coffin was his play on the long 73-yard punt return in that game. He was the one that was responsible for that gap. Just got taken completely out of the play. And I think missed some other tackles. He really, really struggled. So for those of us paying close attention, I realized that last year, based on what we saw from him early, this might seem like it's coming out of left field, but after the second half of last season and all through this offseason, if you've been paying close attention to where Kamal Martin has been slated, this is not a big surprise. I mean, they even moved him to outside linebacker at one point early in camp, just trying to see if they could get anything from him. And we wish Kamal well, but it just didn't seem to click here. So I don't know if there was more to that story. But to me, his play on the field was significantly underwhelming, and I think that's probably the main contributor.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, even with kind of the prediction going into that Jets game, still pretty shocked by the fall of Kamal Martin, because last year, he was one of the guys that was flashing all throughout camp. He was, people were talking, oh, he could be the starter. He could be the starting inside linebacker the Packers have been looking for. Blake Martinez is no longer here. And to see it really a calendar year later, he's no longer in Green Bay, has not been picked up by anybody yet either, is really shocking to me. So it shows the fortune, how quickly fortunes can change in Green Bay. But I think it also speaks to the depth of the inside linebacker position that the Packers have this year compared to maybe in previous seasons. This is a pretty deep group. I know that fans have their issue with the inside linebacker group as a whole over the last couple of years, but I think that, Wags, this is one of the better groups that I've seen in a little bit here. There's enough guys doing a lot of different things. I know we're very high on Chris Barnes, undrafted last season, but just across the board, it shows that the Packers can't really take a flyer this year on Kamal Martin. And in fact, they've just decided to cut their losses because they frankly like what they've already got on the roster, I think, more than what Kamal was going to be able to offer.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, look, it's one of those situations where you better just move on if he's not going to be in the plan. Maybe they were trying to do him a favor and, at least he has some chance to latch on. I haven't seen that he's actually signed with anyone, so I may have been out of the loop because I wasn't actually checking or following. Yeah. But either way, the Packers were proactive. And if nothing else, it sends a message to the rest of the guys in that room. If you don't perform, you're gone. And guess what? Kamal Martin wasn't performing in practice. He wasn't performing in the games. He wasn't doing his responsibilities. And so, I think that keeps everyone else very motivated and sends the right message. You're not going to just get rid of a talent because they have one bad game. I get it. But this was definitely an accumulation of efforts, I think, over the course of many, many practices and games. So this isn't something that was just completely out of left field. It wasn't a Ty Montgomery situation as far as I'm concerned. This is the preseason. But I think it was still a strong message either way.
Wags, let's get into it. We've got a roster full of talented players. And let's start right away at the quarterback position. We can keep 53, 16-man practice squad. We're not going to go into who we think the practice squad guys are going to be today. But I think that we can talk about this 53-man roster. And I think the big question mark here at quarterback is it two or three guys? Two of the guys are already locked in. Aaron Rodgers, Jordan Love, they ain't going anywhere this year. Looking broadly speaking, but looking at the quarterback group, because in silos, it'd be great to keep Kurt Benkert. He played pretty well, but you only have 53 spots on the entire roster. Wags, is there any scenario you see where Kurt ends up on the active roster? Do you think that this Packer team's going to be carrying two quarterbacks going into the season?
I think it's just two. Last year was an exception because obviously we're not going to expose Jordan Love to waivers. So Kurt, I really like him. I think he's done a lot of really good things. I hope we're able to keep him around. I have a feeling someone else might snap him up, and maybe it's his decision too, where even if he's not on a roster, he decides to head somewhere else, someone else's practice squad, just looking around and being like, am I really going to get any chances here with Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love in front of me? Probably not. Selfishly, as Packer fans, I think it would be great to keep him, kind of, a break in case of an emergency situation. I like what I've seen out there from him on the field, but I just don't feel like we have a need or the luxury to be carrying three quarterbacks on this roster. We've got needs elsewhere, and so I don't really think that Kurt Benkert is going to make this 53.
Yeah, and I think the biggest concern, I agree with you, first of all, Wags, and I think that the concern that maybe Green Bay has is Benkert could go back to Atlanta. Atlanta's backup quarterback's out for the year, A.J. McCarron now. Benkert knows the offense, knows what's going on down there, so I could see a scenario where he ends up back in Atlanta on an active roster, but when you have so much competition and you're trying to chase a Super Bowl this year, no disrespect to Kurt, we both love the guy, but we shouldn't be squabbling over the third string quarterback at this point. If we get to the third string quarterback, we're probably in a little bit of trouble already. The future right now is very likely Jordan Love. So let's double down on that decision. If we can keep Kurt, great. We'd love to have him on the practice squad, but I think otherwise, if it's not him, I think the Packers carry 3 quarterbacks, but the third quarterback is going to be a practice squad guy this year.
I completely agree. I think that's really the situation here. And again, they'll be able to go pick up another guy to be that practice squad quarterback if it's not Kurt. It would be really nice if it is Kurt, but I understand he's got to do the best thing for himself and his family. But hey, it's a stable situation here, and he could really make a name for himself to continue to develop. So who knows? If he likes it here and he feels like this is the best place for him, I sure hope it works out for both sides. But ultimately, if we get into the situation where he's needed, it's not the best situation. Let's just put it that way. But he did show me enough that it wouldn't be as dire as I think we've had in
Yes.
other seasons, even just going to our number 2. So that's a quarterback group as a whole. You've got to feel a lot better about than we've had in the recent past. So Dane, I think then moving on from the quarterbacks, let's just kind of go in order here on offense. Yeah. I think our top 3 running backs are locked in at this point for sure. We thought this would be a battle, potentially 3 to 4 running backs, and with that third running back being a potential battle. I mean, I think Kylan Hill, no disrespect to A.J. Dillon, who's done just fine, but I think Kylan Hill is closer to being a number 2 than he is to being, off of this group of 3. So as far as I'm concerned, they're locked in. Did anyone distinguish themselves? We had Patrick Taylor and Dexter Williams as the other 2 guys that really got work at running back. Do you feel either of them did enough that they could potentially carry 4 running backs to start the season, or do you see them rolling with those top 3 guys and hopefully keep one of those other 2 around on the practice squad?
Yeah, unfortunately, no. I think it's going to be the 3. Again, they're going to stay lean at the running back position, keep those 3, particularly with how good Kylan Hill has been. He's locked in the kick return job too, as far as I can tell. So he's going to be able to contribute some on special teams, and they're going to find ways to get him on the field, man. Like early this season, Aaron Jones was quoted as saying, Kylan Hill's going to help us win football games this year. I don't disagree. The running back spot is always a head scratcher because a guy like him can slip until the late rounds, and then he's going to be contributing instantly. But I do think that we'll carry 1, maybe even 2 running backs. It's not out of the question with the Packers to carry multiple running backs on the practice squad. I thought Dexter Williams looked really good running the ball in the opportunities he was given in the preseason. The knock on him oftentimes has been more so pass blocking than running the ball. I think we always knew he could kind of do something with the ball in his hand. Patrick Taylor reminds me a little bit more of a Jamal Williams, a little bit better of a pass blocker. He put the ball on the ground in the preseason, which I think made it really tough. That kind of sealed his fate, I think, a little bit on the active roster. But I think we'll definitely keep 1, potentially both of them on the practice squad. I really could see that because it's a violent position, and there's a chance those guys get called up at some point. But long answer to a short question, it's 3 running backs to start this year. I don't see any other way it happens.
We're in complete alignment, so I agree with you, Dane. So I think it'll be interesting to see where we diverge. But
it's coming, I think.
Perhaps. I don't know which order you had written down, but I've got tight end next.
Sure.
And Dane, I don't know about you. Perhaps this is the first divergence. But the tricky thing here now, as we get into tight end and then offensive line in a little bit, is what are they doing with Jay Sternberger, because he doesn't count against the 53-man roster if they do keep him, at least for the first 2 weeks. But also, what are they doing with David Bakhtiari? The news on that's been pretty quiet. So is David Bakhtiari going to start the season on the physically and unperform list? Is he going to be on the 53-man roster? Expecting him to come back sooner than the first 6 weeks. So that's a little bit of an unknown, and that could definitely impact the makeup makeup of this initial 53, because, and I stress initial because it will change pretty fluidly, I would expect, after even the first couple of weeks. So it's going to be interesting. But here's what I have to say, Dane. Yesterday, before the game, I said it wouldn't make sense not for the Packers to hold on to Sternberger and delay making a decision on him just in case there's an injury of any of the guys in front of him in those first 2 weeks. Now I'm not so sure. What he showed out there in the preseason, I don't know if it's enough that he deserves to be on this roster. But that question still lingers. So I've got 4 tight ends on this roster ultimately, and Jay Sternberger is not one of them. But more than likely, there's no reason not to have him on to start. So I think for the purpose of this discussion, the 4 tight ends that obviously Mercedes Lewis and Bob Tunyon are going to be on this roster, as well as DeGuara. And then I've actually got Daphne ahead of Jay Sternberger right now. So even if Sternberger's on this 53 to start, I think, he's behind Daphne at this point. And so I've tentatively got 4 tight ends on this roster, with the caveat that if none of those guys get hurt, I think they'll just cut Sternberger and part ways with him after week 2. I don't see him getting activated upon his return from his suspension. But the question is, do they do that before the season, or do they hold on to him and delay making that decision?
Yeah, I agree with you on your 4. Daff was out there. He played about 12 snaps, I think I saw yesterday, but they had him in the backfield. They had him doing stuff that Jay Sternberger doesn't do. So they're going to keep those 4. I don't see a scenario where any of those guys aren't on the roster to start the year. Sternberger, he'll be on the suspended list. I would agree. I think they keep him around on that suspended list, and then they're going to have to make a decision after that. I don't think he's long for the Packers roster, though, Wags. It's simple as that. He looked disinterested, I thought, a little bit yesterday when he was out there running his routes. The one ball from Jordan Love, I can't put on Jace. The ball was high. Jordan didn't set his feet. It just wasn't a good series of there. But overall, he missed a block on that 3rd down and goal that A.J. Dillon got stuffed on. It's a tough block. It's a reach block. I get it. But if you're Jay Sternberger trying to make a roster, that kind of stuff just stands out. And I think it was even telling going back to his first game of the preseason when he had the big 34-yard catch. When your position coach says that's not indicative of the player that we've seen, that's not a great recommendation. So I don't want to beat a dead horse. I just don't think Jace is probably long for the team. And in fact, I would argue Bronson Kafusi might have a better chance. He transitioned from D-line to tight end. Rodgers is saying his praises, but not just him. The coaching staff seems to love him. He seems like a developmental guy that could stick around because he's kind of that Mercedes Lewis, a big-bodied blocker. I would argue he may have a better chance of suiting up, which I can't believe I'm saying. I don't think I would have said that 3-4 weeks ago, but just based on how training camp goes. But I agree. Sternberger will start on suspended list. They'll make a decision after that because there's no reason not to, but he may be done in Green Bay.
Yeah, so for all intents and purposes, we can count tight end as 4.
Yes.
We don't have to count. So I think, so we are in agreement there, I think, on how that plays out. So anyway, that's interesting. So I think the other group, then we'll save wide receiver for the last positional group on the offense, because the other part of that equation, David Bakhtiari, will he be on the active roster? I think he will. And I don't know that he's going to play before week 3, week 4, but I think they're going to keep him on the active roster. And to me, I think that means they might carry 11 offensive linemen on this initial 53-man roster, because they need to make sure that they've got enough bodies. And I think they really like some of the guys in this group. But when Bakhtiari comes back, similar to, obviously Bakhtiari is going to be starting the minute he comes back. That just goes without saying. But the similarity to the Sternberger situation is that's when you can make the decision versus having to make a decision now on who will ultimately be part of that offensive line group in the long term. The other thing is, offensive linemen, there tends to just unfortunately be more injuries, whether they're the short-term nicked up variety or hopefully not, but sometimes there's some of those longer-term injuries as well. So by the time Bakhtiari comes back, the decision may have already been made for them. So I think they're going to want to try to retain ultimate flexibility with this offensive line group. So I've got 11, and Dane, before I mean, we know who the obvious ones are, but before, we move forward and talk about who we think is going to be part of that offensive line group, what was the number that you had for offensive linemen on this 53?
Yeah, so I think that I actually, when we're talking pure 53 man roster, I agree. Bakhtiari's not going to be on the physically unable to perform list. I think they start him on the active roster. However, I think they might do some maneuvering, take advantage of the IR rules this year, and he is part of the official 53, and then they throw him on the IR. He can come back after 3 weeks. So I think that there's going to be instant 53, and then I think there's really going to be 54. They're going to kind of massage the roster a little bit that way. But for all intents and purposes, I've got us keeping 10, including David Bakhtiari on the first 53, and so I have us keeping 10 offensive linemen, Bakhtiari being one of them.
Bakhtiari is the 10th or the 11th?
He's number 10, and then
Okay.
I think he goes to IR, and then I think we bring somebody back.
Gotcha. So once he goes to IR, are you predicting they have another offensive lineman to replace Bakhtiari, or will they carry 9 and add to another position group?
So it's going to be interesting. So I might be putting on my getting kind of deep here into the rules of it. But we brought in Kelly, who's a veteran offensive tackle. I could see the Packers cutting him early right away too, missing the first week of the year. Then they bring him back after week 1 because they don't owe him then the entire year's salary. So I think that there might be a couple maneuverings going on here, but I think that there's a good chance that the Packers keep 10 initially. Bakhtiari goes to IR. We bring somebody else on for a week, and then we bring Kelly back after week 1 because then we're able to keep him on and not guarantee a salary for the year.
Okay, well, let's run through the guys then who we have, because I'll be curious to hear how this shapes out. I think you slightly tipped your hand there, but it sounds like we might end up being in agreement. It's more the semantics of
we're close.
how they get there. So
we're close.
Obviously Bakhtiari and Elton Jenkins, Josh Myers will be starting at center. And then I've got Billy Turner, John Runyon, Lucas Patrick. And then it starts to get a little bit more interesting, but ultimately I think they keep Ben Braden. I really liked what we saw in Yash Nizman. The Packers have spent 3 years developing him, and aside from a strip sack that he gave up in the second game, which wasn't 100% his fault, but he'll take responsibility for that. I think he's been super solid out there, so I like keeping him around at least until Bakhtiari gets back as a swing tackle, and then. I think what we'll end up doing is Royce Newman will definitely be on this roster, and then I've got Cole Van Lanen on this roster as well. So I don't know if I've counted correctly, but Dennis Kelly, I agree, he's the last guy. He's number 11 for me. So I think what's going to happen is once Bakhtiari is activated, whenever that is, or however the Packers want to play that out, clearly they're going to have a much better idea of when they might expect him to be ready to go, but there's no reason to rush him back as far as I'm concerned. Then it'll either be Kelly getting cut, or perhaps if there's been an injury in the meantime, as I said earlier, that'll ultimately make their decision for them. So, Dane, any one that you diverge on as far as the offensive lineman that I named, or are we in agreement with that group as well?
Not only are we in agreement, but the first 6 guys you mentioned are exactly how I listed them on my page, Wags. So that's kind of freaky. I would agree. I think that Yash really probably had one of the better camps that you could have. I know the strip sack's what people see, but reality is he played some really, really good football. I was looking at some Pro Football Focus numbers, and he played kind of through the roof even this last week. So good for him. He's going to make this team. I think that, but we're in complete agreement across the board. Ben Braden's another guy who just kind of came out of nowhere. We signed him partway through the year last year. It bounced around the league a little bit. Now he might not end up starting, but even this last preseason game against the Bills played really well, I thought, at right tackle. So, kudos to some of these guys, but there's no departure on my roster. I think that Kelly is the last guy standing, and he's the biggest question mark. He came in, veteran guy, didn't necessarily look great in the short amount of time that he was on the field, learning the playbook. I can give him a pass. Then he gets hurt. So that's kind of a tough camp for somebody like him, but I think his familiarity with Coach LaFleur and he knew each other from their days in Tennessee. He's going to play some ball for the Packers this year. That's my gut feeling, but I do think that he's kind of the last guy standing on that list because I don't see a scenario where they're getting rid of Yash. Runyon's too young, going down the list. Van Lanen hasn't totally impressed me either, but his draft stock alone keeps him around, and we saw him put on way too much good tape at Wisconsin to see him gone this early. So some of these guys are just going to need to develop a little bit more, but we're in total agreement on the guys we got on the roster, Wags.
Yeah, and it might just depend on what situations are too. I mean, if Bakhtiar is not ready to return and, we have someone go down at the tackle position the first couple of weeks, we might feel more comfortable with a guy like Dennis Kelly out there.
Yeah.
Versus a Cole Van Lanen might be a little bit of a longer term project, but he may give you a little bit more versatility and being able to play multiple positions in the long run. So it will be interesting to see how that goes down, but it sounds like we're basically in agreement. It's just some of the maneuverings of the roster, if you will, with how that will ultimately go down. What's initial 53 versus who they immediately activate after moving Bakhtiari around or whatever they need to do. So that leads us into the wide receiver group then, Dane. And I think by extension here, we talked about 6. It seems like 6 is the number. Coach LaFleur has mentioned 6 is who's battling for that 6th spot. So it seems like, I don't think that's set in stone, but that feels like that was the number all along. And I think they made the decision on Devin Funchess based on that. And although it comes down to a really late push here, ultimately, I think the guy's got to be Malik Taylor as your 6th receiver. And I don't think they're going to keep 7. I think Reggie Begelton probably separated himself from the rest of the wide receivers that were battling for that last spot. It will be interesting to see what Reggie does. Obviously, we're big fans of his. He came on the pod last year. I am sure he's really, really hoping to get onto this 53. But with the COVID rules, if he decides to stick around on the practice squad, if the Packers want to use a spot on him, I know he's a little bit older, but he could be one of those guys. He doesn't have a lot of NFL service time, so he could be one of those guys that they could keep around. And he may have an opportunity to get elevated multiple times over the course of this season if he does decide to continue here in Green Bay. But Dane, I don't know, first of all, are you in agreement on the 6, or do you think they expand this to 7 just because of some of the extra space they might have initially?
Yeah, so this was one of the harder spots on the entire roster that I had, and I've got him at 7. I think Begelton did enough yesterday, or that's we're recording on Sunday. I thought that Reggie played well enough. The fact that he's back there as the number 2 punt returner in all of these games, I thought was really fascinating. He showed a little bit there. He's also been a really good jammer on special teams. His age works against him, I think, a little bit. If he was 22, I think the Packers would be like, oh, shoot, we can't expose him to waivers. They may, because of that, expose him to waivers and then try to bring him back to the practice squad ASAP. I think they want him within the organization. There's no doubt about that. But I just think he's done enough on special teams, and they're going to need guys that play his role on special teams. And you'll know why when we get to the defense, why I think that Reggie stays. Everything kind of connects one way or another. I just think that he's done enough over the course of his time, and not only as a wideout, but as a special teams guy. And Malik Taylor showed it last year that the Packers are not above doing a surprise or two on the roster. Malik Taylor, I think, shocked a lot of people earning a roster spot last year. This year, there's no way Malik doesn't stay. He looked way too good. He looked so fluid, Wags, catching that ball. He got good separation. He looks like a different player, even from last year. And we already know what he does in special teams. But I think Begelton did enough, sneaks in the back door and sticks on the initial 53. If he doesn't, he ends up staying with the team unless he gets another opportunity somewhere else. But right now, official roster, I think we keep 7. And that was really hard because going into this game, I didn't have him there. But after it, and I watched him and I saw how they were using him, I said, you know what? They like him. They want to see him succeed. He's going to stick.
Yeah, the line is razor thin. I mean,
yes.
we texted back and forth that really when you get down to these last few spots, it's like basically between just a few guys. I'll be surprised. Let's put it this way, not to toot our horn, but I'll be surprised if we get more than 1 or 2 wrong, and actually I wouldn't be terribly shocked if one of us ends up being exactly right 53 for 53 here. But anyway, it's an interesting exercise to play out. So for Reggie's sake, I hope that happens. We will see. I just was reading through the lines with Coach LaFleur talking about the 6. So we'll see if Reggie did enough to change their plans and get a spot on this roster initially. So Dane, let's head over to the defensive side of the ball then. And, this, I don't know if this is as much set in stone as it was offensively, but I think let's move around a little bit because some of these groups, I think the numbers might be different, but ultimately I think we're going to be pretty close. So big guys up front, defensive line. There's been years we haven't carried as many, but I think we're going to take 6 this year. And so I don't know if you have the same number, Dane.
I've got 5, Wags.
You have
so
5.
This is where this is one of those spots.
So we have a little bit of a divergence here. So Dane, talk to me then. Who does and doesn't make the cut on your list?
So I have Clark, I've got Kiki, and I've got Slayton as locks. Slayton being a 5th-round pick. He's looked very good, I think, in camp. He's going to be eating up blocks. Kiki, the Packers love his pass rush ability.
Not a lock?
Well, that's the question mark, actually, Wags. So on the back end of this defensive line, I've got Heflin making the team, and that's where it gets very interesting. At the end of the day, I have Heflin and I have Lowry on the roster, but I almost had Lowry not making the team and Tyler Lancaster making it. I'm going to stick with Lowry on the 53, but I think that Lancaster is a semi-surprise cut. Heflin just does a lot of the stuff Tyler does. He's a couple years younger. He's a little bit cheaper. I think he offers a little bit more upside in the pass rush. Willington Prevlon made it tough for me too, actually. But if I would have kept 6, I would have had Prevlon over Lancaster as well. So that kind of shows where I'm at on that front.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. I mean, Dean Lowry's guy, he was one of the veterans that didn't go out there and get any snaps at all in preseason. Yeah. By all accounts, surprisingly, has looked really good in camp. So I'm not saying that just to stir the pot with you, Dane. It's just I'm interested to hear what your thought on that was. Is that mostly because you've been impressed enough with some of these younger guys that you find Dean Lowry expendable, perhaps to save a little bit of money against the cap and use that elsewhere throughout the season? Or is it more that you're just unimpressed with Dean Lowry? He hasn't done enough for you in your mind that he was necessarily a lock?
I think Dean's a nice player. But unfortunately, we're not talking, college football where money's not involved. When we start talking about salary implications, and we've got a lot of big name players coming up for free agency, the Packers have always been a team that have looked ahead. And I get that we're going all in and all of this. However, big picture, I look at Dean Lowry. Part of me goes, yeah, they kept him off the field. But part of me went, yeah, they kept him off the field so they could package him up and try to trade him for a late round pick. So, and I don't want to be crass with that. This is this guy's profession. He's been a good Packer for a long time, but I don't know if the production meets the money. And then, with the Venn diagram, does that cross over with somebody like a Heflin and a Prevalon? But I think at the end of the day, the Packers, knowing where they're at in this season more than any other season, I think Lowry ends up making the team. The coaching staff seems to be comfortable with him. He's a hardworking guy, doesn't miss a lot of practice time. There's pluses to Dean, so I don't want to trash Dean at all. But it was closer when I was making the cuts for Wags than I thought it was going to be, because I could see a scenario where they decide to just shake it up, because the defensive line position has been a fair bit underwhelming over the last couple of seasons. I don't think I'm saying anything that people haven't noticed. And I thought that maybe the team might want to shake it up with a couple new guys. And, but end of the day, I think we'll keep Lowry on the roster, but I think Tyler Lancaster is going to be a victim of the cut.
Okay. So, just for the record, I'm not going to sit here and predict trades. So you're kind of really getting pretty nuanced here. So that's impressive stuff, Dane. I got to tell you. That was part of the reason I had 6. I wasn't thinking trade, but to me, I agree that Tyler Lancaster is the one that gets cut. I appreciate he's been a blue-collar guy. I just don't think he has enough upside at this point. He's not expensive, but costs obviously a little bit more than a guy like Jack Heflin does, and I've been super impressed with what Heflin's done out there. So if you're going to pick between the two, usually you just go with the younger guy. I think Heflin has a little bit more fluidity than Tyler does as well. I think he can get upfield and maybe be a little bit more disruptive, where Tyler's just more of kind of that, eats up blockers and eats up space. But I think Heflin can actually move a little bit better as well. So I agree with you there. I've actually got Prevalon making the team.
You do?
Okay. I think I've been impressed with him in this preseason. He's, when you look at the stat sheet, his name's not going to pop up, but I think he's been really solid out there. I like the leverage and the push that he gets upfield. He seems like he is staying in his gap and maintaining gap responsibility. And he's gotten quite a few snaps. So I've liked what I've seen from him out there. I think he's a little bit more athletic than a guy like Dean Lowry. I think he's got maybe more upside. I don't know. Obviously, he was a 7th-round pick last year. So I'm not saying that he's going to be the next Rashawn Gary out on the defensive line. But I think he's someone that, a less expensive option could probably do a lot of what Dean Lowry gives you as he gains more experience and more game experience. So that could potentially make a Lowry expendable, perhaps. I don't know that I would predict that right now based on what I've heard. I think they'll keep 6 initially, but who knows? Those things can change a little bit. And then if they feel like they've gotten a little bit of extra money or a little bit of wiggle room, listen, they could still bring someone outside that plays D-line that's not signed at this point, or perhaps gets cut as rosters get cut down, if they feel like they can leverage some of the additional funds that they have to improve this group that way. So to your point, while I feel better about the defensive line coming into this season than it did last season, I don't think they're done with this group. But they were a little thin last year with injuries, so I think they need to carry 6. That way they're not going to be shorthanded right away early in the season.
Wags, you hit it. And, listen, there's going to be a lot of cuts going on, not just with us, but obviously everybody else across the league. Goody has shown time and again that he is not afraid to take a look at other talent from other teams' rosters. And I'm sure there's going to be some teams that wish they could hang on to a D lineman, and they're not going to be able to. So wouldn't surprise me. I would say that defensive line is actually one of the target positions potentially for the Packers to still add one more piece. There's another spot on the defense, actually the outside linebacker position. I think I texted you this offline. That's the other one that I could potentially see the Packers painting corners and looking to add talent on. But it'll be really fascinating to see, because I think we're going to see a 53-man roster, and then we're going to see a real roster a few days later after all the free agents are kind of popping around. Inside linebacker. I want to get your sense here. I want to know, how deep is this going to go? This is the much maligned inside linebacker group that Packer fans are frustrated with year in and year out. Where are we at? Where do you think that we end up here?
Yeah, this was a tough call, but I think as much as McDuffie stood out a little bit yesterday, I think they're going to stick with 4. And maybe McDuffie gets the nod as the 5th guy, just if they're afraid that someone might snap him up now that he put some tape out there. But I don't know if they can afford to keep 5 inside linebackers when you look at the rest of this roster. Ray Wilborn, I thought it looked pretty solid out there yesterday too, and I think he's a guy that they can keep around on the practice squad and potentially elevate if needed as one of the 2 guys they can call up on game day. So it just depends how much do they like McDuffie, and does McDuffie, is he someone that knocks an Oren Burks or a Ty Summers out? I don't think so right now. I just don't think he did enough. He's the younger guy, so maybe. I could be wrong on that. But ultimately, I've got 4. We've got Campbell and Barnes, and then Summers and Oren Burks, I think are going to be the 4. But there could be a surprise. Maybe Burks or Summers doesn't make it just because they're similar to a Tyler Lancaster, a little bit older, but I think those 2 are so important to special teams. And the way that Oren Burks played in camp and in preseason, I can't believe I'm saying this after the last few seasons, but I just don't know how they move on from him. He clearly was one of the top guys out there in this group. So I think he deserves to be on this roster. So, Dane, I don't know if you have a different number than me, but my thought process is they keep 4, and they'll try to stash McDuffie and definitely Wilborn on the practice squad. But I guess I wouldn't be super surprised one way or the other how this group shakes out.
Yeah, I have Ray Wilborn and Dijon Harris both on the practice squad for the Packers. I thought both of them have showed pretty well throughout camp.
They're a little bit more of a project, though, right?
Both, exactly. So I neither one of those guys are going to be active roster guys day one, but with the call ups, they showed way too much, I think, for the Packers not to want to have them as a part of the organization and maybe even get some of those special teams call ups in and day out. But I actually do have the Packers at 5. McDuffie being a draft pick on top of everything else, I think helps him a little bit. I don't think it comes at the expense of Ty Summers or Oren Burks for the reasons you said. Both are special teams talents. The Packers are preaching, wanting to get better at special teams. You're not going to get better at special teams. I'm seeing those guys go. I just don't see it happening. Summers sitting yesterday, Oren Burks barely playing, I thought actually was a positive for both of them. I think it kind of meant that they have it locked up. Ty was a little banged up with some, I think some lower leg injuries. Oren Burks, they got him out there, right, for a little bit, but they gave McDuffie a long look. I think it was more, is McDuffie going to give the Packers some heartburn to try to find a spot for him on the roster or not? And that's what may or may not end up happening. But I'm going to predict 5, but the Packers have 7 deep with the guys we talked about in Harris and Wilborn that I think that they like. But I think they're going to keep them mainly for special teams is where we're going to see that. And if you look at the breakdown of the roster, we've got Campbell, we've got Chris Barnes. After that, the next natural linebacker, like true inside linebacker, is Ty Summers. Oren Burks, a little undersized. I see him as more of a dime guy. If Campbell goes down, or if Chris Barnes, for whatever reason, are we more comfortable with a 6th round rookie or with Ty Summers? I'm more comfortable with Ty Summers, understanding the defense. He's been there. So as Packer fans are looking at it, I look at it through that lens as well. The depth could drop pretty quickly, but I do think that McDuffie sticks.
Yeah, and so I agree with everything you're saying, and that's going to be a really tough decision. I guess for me, what it came down to was, do you keep 6 D linemen or 5 inside linebackers? Right. And I just feel like it's harder to get defensive linemen. We saw last year they were rotating guys from off the street all season, trying to get enough healthy bodies out there. And ultimately, if you lose someone and you need to bring someone in at inside linebacker, I think that's an easier position group to go out and find someone. So that was more how I made my decision. But listen, I agree. I think McDuffie has some potential, so it's hard to part with a guy like that. So we'll see what they do. But again, with some of the maneuverings that they're able to make, hopefully they can, get all of the key guys they want to stick around here and be in the right spot. And then, unfortunately, injuries are going to happen. So they'll have to make some decisions down the road, but that could just sort of work its way out on its own as well. So, okay, Dane, we're getting down to it then. So last few groups here. So edge. Last year we kept 4. I expect us to keep 4 again this year. I know you mentioned yesterday, is it only going to be 3? I don't think they can afford to carry only 3 edge guys on this roster, especially with Za'Darius. I don't think he's got a significant injury, but some concern he may not even be ready to go week 1 with the back injury. Ultimately, I'll be surprised if he doesn't go, but he's missed quite a bit of practice time already in camp. So I think they're going to keep 4. And for me, I think it's the same 4 that they had last year. And I think Spider, Jonathan Garvin, ends up being the 4th guy of this group. Finally, yesterday, out on the field, I thought he showed some flashes, got some quarterback pressures, and was able to get some disruptions in the backfield. He's gotten some snaps and was on the roster all last season. Didn't really flash out on the field, but by all accounts, had some a little bit of a separation from the rest of the guys vying for that 4th spot in this group in practice. So it was good to see him do that in a game situation yesterday. I know it's only one game, but it's some progress, and I think he probably has the most upside potential out of any of the guys that we currently have in this group. You may argue that Chauncey Rivers did enough to really give some thought and consideration to whether he might earn a spot over Jonathan Garvin. I think there's some merit to that. I just feel like Garvin just has a little bit more upside, and ultimately I think that's what this comes down to is if they can get him to make a few more of those splash plays, that he could be someone that could have a little bit more long-term potential as well.
We have the same 4. Garvin's only 21. It's hard to look past a guy who's that young, who's already got some NFL experience and who shows flashes. I'm looking at the list that I scratched together here, and I had Chauncey Rivers on it. I scratched him off of it. It just the numbers don't work to keep him. But I thought he showed quite a bit of moxie and talent to come in from Baltimore and just kind of step in, and he showed a lot of talent. So I think the Packers, another guy, probably are going to want to try to keep around if they can. Tipa Nalei, I like Tipa quite a bit, but he might have to hit the weight room another year. He was pushed around a little bit at times. He's a good athlete. You can tell he's a good athlete. But I think end of the day, the Packers start with 4, maybe elevate a guy if Za'Darius is down week 1 or is battling injury, just so you have enough guys to throw at an opposing offense. But when we're talking 53, Garvin's he could be a guy, right? He very well might not be either, but at 21, he's showing better bend this year. You could see him. He's got burst. He's got speed. He's got kind of those intangibles that you look for from a pass rusher, those long arms, all the things that make the coaches' heads turn. So I think the Packers keep 4, and Wags, once again, I guess we're in agreement at another position. We don't talk about this, folks, ahead of time. So I was hoping we'd have more turmoil. Maybe we'll have some at the cornerback position.
Well, we weren't 100% aligned on several position groups, so I know it doesn't seem like we're disagreeing at all, but we've got a few differences, so that's good. That way, one of us at least will be right. That's the main thing. Okay, well, let's talk about cornerback then, because I don't really think there's much more to go into the outside linebacker. So here I think we keep 6. This is a group we've kept 7 some years. I've got 6, not to get ahead of myself, but part of that is I've got 5 safeties making this roster. So for me, the 6, the first 5 are pretty clear cut. kind of like wide receiver with Jair Alexander, Eric Stokes, Kevin King, Shandon Sullivan, and Shamar Jean-Charles. The sixth guy comes down to Yidam and Kabion Ento. For me, I like Kabion Ento. I know he had a little bit of a rough time out there against the Jets. And then yesterday, I don't know exactly how many snaps he got. He seemed fine. I like Ento. I think he's got some long-term potential here with how he mixes it up and some of his ball skills. Yidam, to me, they just brought him in as Josh Jackson trade, last-ditch effort to bring some competition. I didn't love what I saw out of him either against the Jets, which I was kind of giving him a pass on since he had such short turnover. But yesterday he got picked on quite a bit. I get it. It's against the Bills. Number one offense, top 3 offense in the league. But ultimately, I just don't think he's someone that really fit the Packers' plans, and it was more just kind of an insurance card to bring him in. So I've got the 6 with Ento being the last guy making this group. So Dane, I don't know if you have agreement or disagreement with me on this cornerback group.
This is the spot I knew we'd disagree on because I kind of disagree with myself on it, but we're going real thin. We're going with 5 is what I have at the cornerback group, and it's mostly because Ento showed flashes. He's also had a bit of an injury history over the last couple of seasons. Converted wide receiver to DB. He shows some really good. He played pretty well in special teams yesterday, but he also just gets picked on some up and down. So the top 5 I completely agree with Shamar being the final, our 5th round pick being kind of the final pick there. John Charles, I think that he didn't really show an awful lot, I thought, in the preseason. Here and there. Didn't see an awful lot from him, but I think he's done enough to make the team.
He made several special teams tackles, too. So
that's what's helpful
out there.
That's what's helpful for him, exactly. And I think that what the Packers did come playoff time last year may end up being the model that they use. They used Kevery Russell, the corner, a ton last year come playoff time to come up and be kind of their extra special teams gunner, their extra special teams guy. And I think the Packers, at least early in the year, may use that kind of roster exemption to their advantage and use kind of a 6th corner that way more often than not. I think they'd like to keep Ento within the team where possible, but I agree. Yadam just didn't show enough. Who actually really impressed me yesterday, Wags, was Steven Denmark. Steven Denmark, number 34. He came in off the street. He's had a cup of coffee with the Bears and the Browns, and I think the Steelers as well. But I'd argue he was one of the better DBs yesterday. When the ball came his way, he actually looked pretty good. Now, his history isn't going to bode well for him. I'm not saying he's making this roster. He's not going to make the 53. But keep an eye on him as somebody that the Packers may keep around. They signed him late here. He became available. They took a chance on him. He looked okay. But all that's to say, I think the Packers stick with 5 corners to start the year, particularly knowing that, we know who we got in a 1st round pick in Stokes, Kevin King, Jair Alexander, Shandon Sullivan. I think special teams is going to come more from our safety group. It's going to be a deep safety group. I've got 5 at safety as well. Part of the reason I don't have 6 at corner is because I'm carrying that extra at safety.
So I just realized that I kept 54 guys instead of 53.
Who are we cutting?
I guess I'm not going to get a GM job anytime soon, contrary to my own belief in my prowess.
J.K. Scott, watch out, buddy.
I think the Bakhtiari / Sternberger situation threw me off a little bit too much. But we're going to go back to I'm just going to follow your plan, and Bakhtiari gets short-term IR. That frees up a spot for me here. That way we can be in a line with our numbers. So anyway, that worked out pretty well. So last group then is safety. Specialists, real quick, I think before you hit the safety specialists, I don't expect any changes unless they decide to bring someone else in to be the punter and remove J.K. Scott. But from a numbers standpoint, it's the three guys we have there right now.
Wags,
So
can we talk
unless
about J.J. Molson for a second? J.J. Molson, the Packers carried a kicker they carried him all throughout the playoffs on the practice squad. Carried him all off season, carried him all preseason. Packers had a punter, cut the punter. Packers had a long snapper, cut the long snapper. JJ Molson remains. He's not going to make the 53, but what's your thought process on that? Because that's one of the more fascinating things. It's very unpacker-like to have an extra kicker all the way through the preseason.
And they didn't even really give him any work aside from kicking off, which is weird. He was hitting 56 and 60 yarders in practice last week. So, I mean, clearly I'm thinking they want to keep him on a practice squad. Normally you wouldn't keep a kicker on a practice squad. But with the expanded practice squad and with COVID, it makes sense to have an extra guy around, and that way he's cleared protocols. So unless someone else needs a kicker and has some tape on JJ from back in college, because they didn't give him much in the preseason to show out the rest of the teams in the league, I expect him to be on the practice squad. That's my take on it. It would be, and by the way, how about Mason Crosby getting a punt yesterday? What if Mason Crosby becomes the de facto punter / kicker, and that opens up an extra roster spot? Now, I mean, obviously I'm joking, but it's interesting because I don't know. J.K. Scott just doesn't do it for me. He had a nice punt yesterday, really good hang time and depth, but it's just so inconsistent. So we'll see. Ultimately, that's not going to change the numbers. If they bring someone else in, it's the same numbers either way.
The hard part about the J.K. Scott situation is not only is he the punter, but he's also the holder, and there's so much timing that goes into kicking, and you know that, Wags, and I know most of our listeners do as well, but it's just so hard after an entire preseason then be like, oh, by the way, we've got a new holder for you. So that makes me nervous to think that we would mess up frankly, the one thing that has been working on special teams, which is Mason Crosby being Mason Crosby. I would hate to tinker with the punter and then we, have some mistakes there in kicker. So I think if I had to bet, J.K. Scott is probably going to make this team again, even after, whatever punters become available. But I'm not going to lie, if we could make an adjustment there and improve the punting, I'd be happy, because I've been disappointed in JK the last couple of years.
Yeah. So Dane, we better get into this safety group. Last but not least, we're going at just over an hour here. So, all right, this was an interesting one. So I've got 5, you've got 5.
Yep.
And this is a group that in the past we've kept 4 guys. I thought they really showed out there in the preseason, and this is a strength of our defense. To me, it comes down to 2 guys, Christian Uphoff and Innis Gaines. Now, Innis Gaines, I would say early in camp, kind of had the leg up, really had a strong performance against the Texans in the first preseason game. Was a little bit up and down at times in the second and third game. Seemed like he was getting more snaps out there with the defense at the safety position. I loved his aggressiveness. He was coming up and making plays on the ball. I think he's got a little bit more speed and fluidity and probably a little bit more flexibility. Now, Uphoff, as a special teamer, might have a little bit of an edge there over Gaines. Gaines did contribute on special teams as well. So, but Uphoff, potentially as a gunner, made some really standout plays out there as well. So this was a really, really difficult one for me. Ultimately, though, I think when you look at the full body of work for what they both did out there in camp, it was a close edge for Innis Gaines, and so I'm going to have him on this 53-man roster. I think Uphoff is someone they can probably keep on the practice squad, potentially gets called up a few times over the course of this season if they need someone to come in and fill that gunner role. That's a really good way to utilize that those extra 2 call-ups, by the way, is to have someone come on and be able to do that special teams contribution. So I think the slight edge goes to Gaines just based on what he did for the full body of work over the preseason. So Innis thump Gaines, I think I'm saying is going to make this 53-man roster. So Dane, I don't know if you had a similar thought process or did you have a little bit of a difference there as well?
So then you've got Amos and Savage are obvious locks. Then you've got Henry Black, Vernon Scott, and then Innis Gaines as the rounding out the roster at the safety position.
Yes,
okay.
That's it. I should have probably said, but to me, those other four guys were pretty clear on the spot. So thank you for clarifying that. But yes, those would be the five that I have.
I have the same. And you know what actually made me come to that realization was actually the last preseason game. Just looking and listen, I don't have Pro Football Focus as the holy grail or anything, but I like to use it as a. They do good work, but I like to use it as part of the puzzle. Stats are one thing, but you can see a lot of things. But Gaines actually was a top 5 performer. He had a couple glaring missed tackles, but he also had 3 stops in yesterday's game. He was around the ball. He was in good position. Uphoff got washed out on special teams on that 53-yard punt that JK had, where they had the big return back, netted only like a 20-yard punt afterwards. Uphoff was nowhere to be found on that play, and I like Christian Uphoff, so I'm not piling on him. I like him a lot. Also gave up a touchdown pass, had a little bit of struggles on the back end of the defense. Innis Gaines played 68 snaps. He led the defense in snaps yesterday. He played an awful lot of snaps. He played an awful lot of football the last few weeks, not only on special teams, but also in the base defense. What that tells me is the Packers were taking a look to see, where can this guy fit in this roster? And the fact that he still ended up grading out actually pretty darn good after all those snaps. I expect a guy who went undrafted to have a couple mistakes here or there. Unfortunately for him, one of them was pretty glaring. But I think that overall he played really strong, solid football. I think he's a little bit more steady at this stage in his career than Christian Uphoff. No doubt about it, Wags. Uphoff, they're going to want to keep him around. They like him. He's kind of nasty. He likes to play football. He likes to hit. The way this game goes, he very well could be on the active roster pretty quick due to injuries, due to otherwise, because he is that kind of guy. However, Innis Gaines, I think he can play anywhere on the defense, in the defensive backfield. I think he could fill in a pinch at the corner position even. So all of that, the breadth of what he's done a really impressive camp. And I think Innis Gaines has earned the right to make this 53, and it's going to be a fight, but I think that he's the guy who probably rounds out the roster this year.
All right. So we were pretty closely aligned. So Dane, just going through quarterback, running back, tight end. After a minor adjustment later, offensive line aligned. You had 7 wide receivers. I had 6. So that was close. And then I had 6 D linemen and you had 5. So those 2 were the groups that were interchangeable. But then ultimately we were aligned all the rest of the way through. You had an extra inside linebacker. I had an extra cornerback. So very, very close. But you can see that these decisions are not easy, and I think there's going to be more that comes into play than just naming your top 53 guys. You have to figure out how all these puzzle pieces fit together, what's going to happen if player A versus player B is exposed to waivers. So there's a lot of different things that the front office is going to be shuffling around. We did the best we could to predict what's going to happen based on what the information we have and what our eyes showed us and what we've been hearing out of practice as well as seeing out in those preseason games. So that was fun. I think, one thing that I want to mention before we sign off is that we won't have another pod here most of this week. We'll probably come back next weekend to do some over-unders, some predictions, one of my favorite podcasts of the year. But then from there forward, we'll be on that twice-a-week schedule. So stay tuned for that. Dane, anything else that you want to hit up before we sign off here?
No, we've got 2 weeks and then it's Packer football again, and everything actually matters and it's for real. We're again excited about the Pigskin Podcast Network. We're excited that you all are coming on this journey with us. And another great football season here is around the corner. Love doing it. Find us on all of our social media platforms. Download us wherever you want, wherever you find your podcast, and tell your friends. Please rate us. Do everything you can. We're going live now sometimes on our Facebook page. We've got a new YouTube page, so we've got a great group of former interviews with players here all off season long. You can actually watch those on our brand new YouTube page as well. But Wags, I'm just excited for football, man. And this is a lot of fun. It's going to be a fun year. And I think I'll just end it on the fact that it's pretty remarkable that we're talking about 4 or 5 guys at the back end of a roster at the NFL level. This is a stacked team this year. This is a stacked football team. And I think that Super Bowl or bust gets thrown around a lot, but it feels like that is in the air in Green Bay this season.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that will wrap us here for today. And just a new tagline we're throwing out there here on Lombardi's Legends podcast is to be legendary. So thanks so much for following along, and say it with us. Go Pack, go.
Go Pack, go.